Good morning or good afternoon, whatever the case may be. We are continuing in Chapter 7 today. Let's recap what we've done so far. In the first section, we practiced finding greatest common factors, otherwise known as GCFs. And then in the second section, we learned how to use the distributive property to work backwards and take a GCF out. And we called that factoring. Remember, I've kind of been stressing what factoring means. It means that you're trying to figure out what things multiply together to get what you had to begin with. So we're going to continue with factoring today, but our factoring is going to look a little bit different. Our goal today is we're going to be given a trinomial. Remember, trinomial means that you have three terms, and our goal is to figure out what two binomials, remember binomial means that you have two terms, what two binomials would multiply together to get the trinomial that we have been given. Basically what we're doing is we are working backwards from what we did in Chapter 6. In Chapter 6, we were given two binomials and we FOILed them out to get the trinomial. Now we're working backwards where we have the answer basically to what would it be if we FOILed these out. Now you'll notice they're blank because we have to figure out what's going to go in the blanks. So what we're going to work on today is kind of just a guess and check method where we're going to guess something, we're going to try it, we're going to FOIL it, and if it gives us what we started with, then that's how we know it's the answer. And if it doesn't give us what we started with, then we have to start over. Then that was not correct. So let's start by looking at the first term. And what we're going to ask ourselves is what would you multiply, what two things would you multiply to get 3x squared? Well, first let's start with a number. What could you multiply to get 3? Well, you only have one option, right? 3 times 1. So I'm going to start by putting a 3 and a 1 in the parentheses. Now you might be wondering, well, how do I know where to put it? How do I know if it goes in the front or in the back? Let's look at where that is. Because that's in the front, then these are going to go in the front of those parentheses. So we figured out how to multiply to get 3. How do we multiply to get x squared? Well, that's not too hard, right? X times x is x squared. So now I have a 3x, excuse me, and a 1x. Okay, so we have the front part pretty much figured out. There were no other options. So it's pretty safe to say that these are the correct answers for the beginning of the parentheses. But now let's look at the back where we have a 4. So here's where we want to ask ourselves, well, what can you get to multiply to get 4? And here's where you have two choices, right? You could do 1 times 4. You could do 2 times 2. We have two options. So we're going to try one. I'm going to try the 2 times 2. So 2 times 2. Notice I don't have a variable with it because there's no variable here with the 4. It's just a number. And then I need a sign. Well, if everything's positive, then definitely going to have some positives. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to FOIL this out. So this is a great review of Chapter 6. We're going to FOIL it out, and we're going to see if we get what we started with originally. So let's get going. So if we did the first term, we would do 3x times 1x. Then for the outer terms, we're going to have 3x times 2. For the inner terms, we're going to have 2 times 1x. And for the last term, we're going to have 2 times 2. So 3x times 1x is 3x squared. So far that's looking pretty good. 3x times 2 is 6x. 2 times 1x is 2x. And 2 times 2 is 4. But here lies our problem. What happens when we combine those like terms in the middle? Well, we get an 8x. But what are we supposed to get? We're supposed to get a 13x. So guess what this tells me? This is not the right answer, which means if it wasn't 2 times 2, it's going to be that 1 times 4. So let's try it. I'm going to do my work over here. We already said we knew the 3x and the 1x were going to be right because that's the only way that you could get 3x squared. But now we're going to try a 1 and a 4 for the ends. So let's see what happens when we FOIL those out. So we have 3x times 1x for first. Then we're going to have 3x times 4 for outer. Then we're going to have 1 times 1x for inner. And for last, we're going to have 1 times 4. So 3x times 1x is 3x squared. 3x times 4 is 12x. 1 times 1x is 1x. And 1 times 4 is 4. So now when we combine those like terms in the middle, 12x plus 1x does in fact give us 13x. And so since we have the same problem we started with, that means that we know confidently that that is the right answer. So we have taken our trinomial and we have factored it. Remember, that means what can you multiply to get it? We factored it into those two binomials. So it's kind of a guess and check method. All right, let's try example number 1. So we know that it's supposed to look like this. We're going to have two binomials being multiplied together. We're going to start with the first term, which is x squared. Notice there's no number in front of it, but it's understood to be a 1. How can you get a 1x squared? Well, that's pretty easy. You would just multiply x times x, or you could put 1x times 1x if you like putting the number in front. Then at the end, we have a 2. How can you get 2? Well, there's only one way to get 2, and that's to multiply 1 times 2. And here we have nothing but plus signs, so we're going to have plus signs. So we're going to FOIL this out to check it, but because we only had one option for the first term, and because we only had one option for the last term, that tells me this is probably going to be right. So let's try it out. So for first, we're going to do x times x. For outer, we're going to do x times 2. For inner, we're going to do 1 times x. And for last, we're going to do 1 times 2. So x times x is x squared. X times 2 is 2x. 1 times x is x, or 1x. And 1 times 2 is 2. And when we combine the 2x and the 1x in the middle, that leaves us with 3x, which is perfect because that matches up with what we had. So this would be our answer. This is the work to prove that our answer is correct, but this right here is the actual answer. All right, let's try number 2. Now number 2 looks a little bit different, doesn't it? Because the variables are in the back of the problem, not in the front of the problem. All that means is they're going to go in the back of the parentheses. What else is different is we have a minus sign. So let's see what happens there. Let's start off with this, 8. How can we get an 8? Well, we could do 8 times 1, or we could do 4 times 2. So we have two options. We're going to have to try guess and check method here. I don't know. Let's start with the 8 and the 1. All right, let's look at the back. We have y squared. Well, what can you multiply to get a y squared? You could do y times y. All right, that's the only option for that one. So we know that that's going to be right. This is the one that we're not sure about. This is where we're going to have to do guess and check. Now what I want you to notice though is that we don't have all pluses, do we? So let's talk about this real quick. How do you multiply to get a positive answer? You either have 2 positives or you have 2 negatives. Same thing's going to happen back here. If I have this positive y squared, I'm either multiplying y times y or I'm multiplying negative y times negative y. But look what's in the middle. Notice there's a minus sign there. That might indicate to us that instead of doing a positive y times a positive y, we might need to do a negative y times a negative y. So let's try that out and see how it works. So we're going to FOIL. So we're going to do 8 times 1 for first. Then for outer, we're going to do 8 times negative y. I'm just using the parentheses so that I remember that that's not a minus sign, that it's a negative y. Then for inner, we're going to do negative y times 1. And then for last, we're going to do negative y times negative y. Let's see what happens. 8 times 1 is 8. 8 times negative y is negative 8y. Negative y times 1 is negative 1y. And negative y times negative y is positive y squared. So when we combine negative 8y and negative 1y together, because they're like terms, we get negative 9y in the middle, which is perfect. So lucky for us, we got it on the first try. This is our answer. All right, now number 3 looks different, doesn't it? Here we see a couple of minus signs. Not only that, but we see 2 variables. But here's what I want you to notice about the variables. Notice that the G's are heavy in the front and the H's are heavy in the back. So what that tells me is the G's will go in the front and the H's will go in the back. So let's start with our first term. We have G squared. How can you get G squared? There's only one way. G times G. Now let's look at the back. Now as I look at this, here's what I want you to notice. I'm not just looking at 16h squared. I am attaching this minus sign to it. So I'm looking at negative 16h squared. So let's talk about how could you get a negative 16? Well, you could do negative 1 times 16, or you could do positive 1 times negative 16. You could do negative 2 times 8. You could do positive 2 times negative 8. You could do negative 4 times 4. We have a lot of options. Now, if we were in a class, I would ask you guys which one you want to choose. And I think I'm just going to go with the first one. So I'm going to choose the negative 1 and the 16. Now, notice we have to have h's with it. So a negative 1h and a positive 16h. And let's see what happens when we FOIL it out together. So we're going to start off with G times G for first. Then for outer, we're going to have G times 16h. Then for inner, we're going to have a negative 1h times G. And then for last, we're going to have a negative 1h times 16h. All right, let's talk for just a moment. Let's look in the middle, because the middle is really where it's going to get to be determining if we have the right answer or not. If we multiply these two together, we're going to get 16gh. If you multiply those together, you're going to get a negative 1gh. What happens when you combine those together? You would get a positive 15gh, which is not what we need. So there's no point in continuing with that problem if I already know it's not going to work. All right, well, if that one doesn't work, then this next one is not going to work either. The only difference is going to be that instead of a positive 15gh, this one would give us a negative 15gh, and that's not what we want either. So now let's try out the next one. So I'm going to have positive g's in the front. Then I'm going to try this negative 2h and this positive 8h. And then I'm going to FOIL it, and let's see what happens. So we have G times G for first. Then we're going to have G times 8h for outer. Then we're going to have negative 2h times G for inner. And then we're going to have negative 2h times 8h for last. So here we go. G times G is G squared. G times 8h is 8gh. All I'm doing there is putting my letters in alphabetical order. Then next I'm going to get a negative 2gh. Let's stop right here real quick and look. What happens if we combine like terms? We get 6gh, which looks pretty good, but what's the problem? We need it to be negative, not positive. So what do you think that means? I think that means that the numbers are right, but the signs are wrong. So I'm going to change this to a plus, and I'm going to change this one to a minus. So let's go back and see what happens. So right here, I would have a negative 8h. Here I would have a positive 2h, negative 8h. So let's see what happens. This would turn into a negative 8gh. This inner term would be a positive. What happens when you combine those together? we're now going to get what we want. So let's keep going right here at the end. 2h times negative 8h is negative 16h squared. And so we just said that our inner term is going to be negative 6gh. And now we have exactly what we started with. So again, we're just doing a guess and check method today and trying out some problems and seeing what we get. Let's try number 4 together. So number 4, we have 2c squared plus 7c plus 6, all plus signs, which is great because that means you already know what your signs are going to be. They're going to be plus. Let's start with the first term. How can you get 2? Well, easy. You would multiply 2 times 1, but specifically we're going to need them each to have a c. So we're going to have a 2c and a 1c. Again, if you want to write the 1, you can. You don't have to. Now let's look at the last term where we have a 6. So we're going to either need a 3 times 2 or a 1 times 6. I want to try the 3 and the 2 first to see what happens. All right, so let's FOIL it out. Let's do 2c times c for first, then 2c times 2 for outer, 3 times c for inner, and 3 times 2 for last. So we would get 2c squared plus 4c plus 3c plus 6, and our middle term turns out to be 7c, and that works perfectly. This is the right answer. Here's something I do want to show you real quick. We actually got lucky that we got the right answer first. What if, remember we already said we needed a 2c and a 1c, but what if when you plugged the numbers in, you had plugged a 2 in the front and a 3 in the back? So what if I had switched those numbers around? Let's see what would happen. So we would have 2c times c plus 2c times 3 plus 2 times c plus 2 times 3. Let's look at the middle terms. Outer would give us 6c. Inner would give us 2c. Would that give us what we want? No. So it's important to note that when you're trying numbers, well, let me back up for just a minute. In this last problem, it wouldn't have been an issue, and I will tell you why. Because in the front, we had 1g for both of them. But look at example 4. Notice how there's a 2c and a 1c. If these aren't the same, then the way you put in the second numbers does in fact make a difference. We see that right here, this would not have worked. So sometimes if you try numbers, and let's say they don't work at first, you might need to flip them around and try them that way for it to work. So again, this is just guessing and checking until we get the right answer. All right, example 5. We have some minuses, so this might take a little bit more work on our part. So sometimes you just have to be patient, okay? So let's start with the first term. How can you get a 3? Well, good news, there's only one way, 3 times 1. So we're going to have a 3m and a 1m. Now let's look at the last number, negative 4. You could do negative 1 times 4. You could do negative 4 times 1. You could do negative 2 times 2. I really wish y'all were in here to tell me what you think, but you're not. So I'm going to just start with the first one, which is negative 1 and a positive 4. All right, so let's FOIL it out. So we're going to have for first 3m times 1m. Then for outer, we're going to have 3m times 4. For inner, we're going to have negative 1 times m. And for last, we're going to have negative 1 times 4. All right, 3m times 1m is 3m squared. 3m times 4 is 12m. Negative 1 times m is negative m. And negative 1 times 4 is negative 4. The first term looks good. The last term looks good. And the middle almost looks good. This would give us an 11m. The problem is we need it to be negative. So remember what we said. If you have the right number, then your numbers are right. It's your signs that you need to correct. So let's change this to a plus, and we're going to change this one to a minus, and let's go back to the foiling process. So first would be the same. Outer, we would have a -4. Inner, we would have a +1. And last, we would have a +1 and a -1. So now, for the outer term, we have a -12m. For the inner term, we have a +m. And now that gives us what we want, which is a -11m in the middle. And so this is the correct answer. So again, we tried something, it didn't work, but all we had to do was change the signs on that one to make it work, and now we are good to go. All right, 2 more problems. So got some minus signs here, so we're gonna have to pay attention to those signs. All right, let's start with the first term, which is a 3. How can you get a 3? There's only one way, 3 and a 1. Notice I don't have a variable with it because there was no variable with the 3. Now let's look at the end where we have a positive 10k squared. Okay, how can you get a 10? Well, you can do 10 times 1, or you could do 2 times 5. Now here's what I want you to notice real quick before I start putting things back here. That works to get that positive 10k squared, but look at the middle. The middle term needs to be negative. So what does that tell us? That means we need negatives somewhere. We can't just have all positives. So if that's the case, then I'm going to have either a -10 and a -1, or I'm going to need a -2 and a -5, because that will still ensure that I get my positive 10k squared, but I need to make sure that I'm going to get a -11k. All right, so I'm just going to start with the first one since y'all aren't here for me to ask. So I'm going to do a -10k and a -1k. And now I'm going to FOIL it out and see what happens. So we're going to have 3 times 1 for first. Then we're going to do 3 times -k for outer. Then we're going to do -10k times 1 for inner. And then last, we're going to do -10k times -1k. So 3 times 1 is 3. Outer term, we're going to get a -3k. Inner term, we're going to get a -10k. And last term, we're going to get a positive 10k squared. So these look okay, but this is going to give us a -13k, which is not what we want. So that's not going to work out for us. What would happen if we changed the placement of the 10 and the 1? So what if we did this one as a -1k and we did this one as a -10k? Let's see if that would help us out. So for first, we would still have 3 times 1. For outer, I would now have 3 times -10k. For inner, I would now have -k times 1. And then I would still have a -10k and a -k. The order would be different, but it's not going to matter when you multiply. Let's see if that changes things. So outer is now going to be a -30k. And inner is going to be a -1k. Well, still not working out for us because that's going to give us a -31k, which is still not going to work. So we've tried both of those. Don't work. Now we can try the next set. So again, we have a 3 and a 1. So I'm going to try a -2k and a -5k. And let's see how it works for us. So we're going to start off with first 3 times 1. Then outer is going to be 3 times -5k. Inner is -2k times 1. And last is -2k times -5k. We already know first and last are going to work. Let's look at these outer and inner. For outer, we're going to get -15k. For inner, we're going to get -2k. And if we combine those, it's going to be -17k, which is still not what we want. So what if we change the order? So I still have the 3 and the 1, but I'm going to change the order of the -2k and the -5k. All right, fourth time, let's see if it works. It's the only choice we have left, right? So we have 3 times 1, then we're going to do 3 times negative 2k. Then we're going to do negative 5k times 1. And then we're going to have negative 5k times negative 2k. All right, 3 times 1 is 3. 3 times negative 2k is negative 6k. Negative 5k times 1 is negative 5k. And back here we get our positive 10k squared. And I think we have it, y'all, because negative 6k minus 5k is negative 11k. We finally have it, and we've proven it using FOIL. Ta-da! All right. One last problem. Here we go. All right, so how can we get a 6 for the first term? We could do 1 times 6. We could do 2 times 3. All right, back here, we have a negative 12. How can you get a negative 12? Well, you could do negative 1 times 12. You could do 1 times negative 12. You could do negative 2 times 6. You could do 2 times negative 6. You could do negative 3 times 4. Or you could do 3 times negative 4. Look at all those options. That's a lot, right? So here's what I'm going to do. I'm actually going to stop the video. I want you guys to try it, and then you can check the notes and see if you got it right. Here's the thing with these type of problems. Sometimes you get lucky on the first try. And for some of you who can FOIL quickly in your head, you can write it down, FOIL it quickly, and see if it works. And if it doesn't work, scratch one of those choices out and you try something else, okay? That's great if you can do that. And I would encourage you to even try to do that. I think it would be great if we could get into the habit of being able to FOIL quickly, because that's something that you need for every math class after this. So I would encourage you to try that. As you're working on your homework, which I think either has just 8 or 10 problems if I'm not mistaken, you are doing the same thing. You're guessing and checking. But here's the important part. You need to FOIL it to show that you have the right answer. So you need to make sure, just like what we did here, where we FOILed out what we thought was the answer to prove that we got the correct answer. So I'm expecting to see that on your work when you send that in to me. And then tomorrow, we'll work on some other ways on how we can factor these trinomials a little bit differently. All right, if you have questions, send me an email, and otherwise I will be talking to you tomorrow in the next video. Have a good day.